Once I realized that we'd been using the rules of war as the basis for conversation, and I realized how contradictory that is to the purpose and intention of conversation. Because in a war, you want to defend yourself in order to protect yourself, and you do use trying to get control over the other person or power struggle as the means to get what you want. In conversation, it becomes much more open. In order to be successful and have a good conversation, it requires being more open and more direct and honest. So I began to think about what would it take to shift from a model of communication where we use defensiveness for self-protection and power struggle to get our needs met, not all the time, but a significant amount of the time, to a model of communication where we would have full power and be able to be open and vulnerable and still protect ourselves and also be much more direct and honest. And so the first thing I realized we needed to change was intention. And when I talk about changing intention, I think in many respects I'm really talking about using power in a different way. So that when I'm in power struggle with somebody, it doesn't have to mean that I'm fighting to get them to do what I want, although it might be that. I might be trying to get someone to convince someone to do what I want them to do. But in many times we are communicating in a way where we're not seeing ourselves exactly in power struggle, but we're seeing ourselves as just trying to get someone to listen to us, or trying to give a family member or a friend a piece of advice that we think would help them with their life. But even no matter how subtle it is, I think it's still power struggle because I'm still reaching out and trying to get you to do something that I think you should do or I want you to do. And when that happens, my intention is, no matter how beneficial I think it might be to you, my intention is still to control you in some way. And when I reach out and try to move you or convince you or control you, the odds are extremely high that you're going to resist. And so the power struggle is going to continue. And many times then we're actually really when we're trying to help someone, we're often simply helping to entrench them in their own position. Once I shift my intention and I'm not trying to control how you respond, it doesn't mean I can't have strong feelings or that there's something I want for you that I think would help you. But if I shift and I'm not trying to control your response, then there are several other things I think I need to change. And I think those things are related to what I think of as our three basic forms of communication. And the first one is questions. And so if I'm shifting from what I call the war model to a non-defensive model, in the war model, when you ask questions, you're often sending double messages or you're entrapping people. I think I mentioned once before that when I looked up the word question in the dictionary, I never found it defined with curiosity, but it was defined over and over again with the word interrogation. So if I want to ask questions, and do it in a way where I'm more likely to disarm defensiveness and diffuse or even eliminate power struggle, then I need to shift from asking questions in a way that makes people feel interrogated to a way that makes people feel actually safe and want to open up. And so then the next thing I thought about was how we make our statements. And in the dictionary, the statement is actually defined as the art of persuasion. Or convincing people. And again, that idea about convincing relates to the intention. If I'm trying to convince you, then I'm also trying to control you. So my next question was, how could I make statements without engaging in something that's going to cause resistance? And I realize there are two parts to any statement. One is when I give feedback to another person, and the other part is when I state my own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. So I thought, in order to communicate with non-defensive power, the next thing we would have to do is to be able to give feedback so that instead of people feeling criticized and judged, which in a, one person in power up and the other person power down, who's winning, who's losing, much of the time when we're giving feedback to people, we tend to do it in a way that has more judgment or criticism. So how could we give feedback to people in a way that they actually felt respected and wanted to hear what we had to say? And then the second part about stating our own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, that we would, in order to make the shift, we would need to communicate in a way where we would state our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, but not passively, but with full passion. But how could we do it in a way where we're not trying to control the other person and get them to agree with us and causing alienation? How could we state it in a way that we could be heard much more easily and not be in the position where we're doing something that's going to alienate that person? And the last one is along with questions and statements, which includes giving feedback and stating our own position. The third form of communication, I believe, is predictions, which we often think of as limit setting. You know, when the parent says to the kid, if you don't get dressed, then you can't watch TV. So a prediction is telling the person, if you do a particular thing, then the consequence, if you don't get dressed, the consequence will be you can't watch TV. If you do get dressed, the consequence will be you can watch TV. In this case, I had to think about, when I looked in the dictionary, the word prediction was defined as punishment, retribution, again, something that's very controlling. If you don't do what I want you to do, then somehow you're going to be punished. So I had to think about, if we were going to communicate with non-defensive power, how would we make predictions so that instead of people feeling punished, people would actually become more competent and be more reciprocal. And that's when I thought about the prediction actually could be something where, like in our physical world, we predict the consequences of our movement. If I were going to step down the stairs and I misjudged it, I could fall and break my leg. So in that sense, the prediction in its natural form would create a certain sense of security. So I would know how to anticipate the consequences of my behavior. So that meant that we would need to shift from making predictions in a way that is threatening or punitive or designed to control the other person, to simply letting the other person know how we were going to respond depending on what choice they made, so that they actually would have the security of predictability. And so all of the rest of my work and many of the stories that I will tell in other videos are based on this kind of shift from using questions, statements, and predictions in almost more like weapons of war designed to control or manipulate, to a process that has an intrinsic power, asking questions with pure curiosity, making statements as a way to give feedback but not try to control the person, and making predictions that allow people to anticipate the consequences of their choices and therefore, I think, make better choices. So if you're interested and want to hear some of the other stories that I'm going to tell about how this process works, you can have this in mind as a frame of reference to understand how I made some of the shifts between what I call the war model and the model that I've developed called powerful non-defensive communication.